And we are live. So, Mr. Licata, for the audience that does not know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, good afternoon or good evening. My name is Pete Licata. I'm a retired special agent at the FBI as a supervisor and a senior bomb tech, retired out of New York City about 2020.
So, explain about what you did and what that would look like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so I mean, I was every special agent bomb tech or SABT because it's federal government, so we love acronyms, right? So SABT is special agent bomb tech. We're all special agents, so we all have the same credentials. Started out as a brand new agent in New Orleans, Louisiana, where like every new agent, you work or you assist with all different types of crime, bank robberies, drug squads, kidnappings. I got moved my way towards the Joint Terrorism Task Force. It was kind of nascent at the time. And then my supervisor encouraged me to get involved in the bomb technician program. So the FBI runs a school down in Huntsville, Alabama. It's at Redstone Arsenal. It's where every public safety bomb technician in the country has to go. So every law enforcement officer who is part of a bomb squad goes to get 6 weeks certification. That's like basically that's kindergarten. All it does is get you a certification, and the rest of it you kind of learn as you go along the way by more senior bomb techs and by acquiring certain experiences. So 2007, I transferred up to the New York City office from New Orleans. And I became more involved in the bomb tech program, eventually becoming the coordinator and then supervising the squad. So a lot of it is response and readiness and preparedness. There's not a bombing every day, thank goodness. The way we used to justify ourselves kind of to the bosses, I'm like, hey, Pete, why do we have so many bomb techs in New York City? And I used to use a colloquialism. It's a good way to get things across to management. And I said, boss, we're like the set of jumper cables you have in the backseat or the trunk of your car. You're always kind of going, why do we have those darn things sitting in there and they're taking up room until the day in the winter, dead of winter, where you're stalled out somewhere and you need those jumper cables. So that's kind of who we are and what we did. But we did a lot of training. We did a lot of liaison with the other public safety bomb squads in the New York City metropolitan area. There's about 72 bomb techs all together. We coordinated their travel and their training, and we also worked hand in hand with them to do responses, and that's a response to a small pipe bomb or a mailbox bomb to some of the larger cases that I worked on, the Chelsea bombing, the attempted bombing of the New York City Times Square, the actual bombing of the New York City Times Square recruiting station, the attempted bombing of the New York City subway, and then a lot of bombing investigations overseas. We also kind of help the sub squad. So those squads that are doing the long-term investigations, we enable them. We add value added to them as become the subject matter experts to help write affidavits and search warrants, testify in court on their behalf as subject matter experts, and also help validate or vet confidential sources that say they have information related regarding a bomber or somebody building explosives. So we help vet a lot of that information out.
One thing I will ask about is when it comes to New York, New York is obviously a very densely populated area and a very targeted area for terrorism. So it must look like a very colossally, it's a colossal amount of time needed to prevent terrorism in New York, I would imagine. So how would you, let's just say there's a guy who wants to, put together a pressure cooker bomb and he wants to put it in a subway in New York, right? Typical act of terrorism for whatever reason. Let's just say he's a member of a political extremist group, right? So he wants to do this to kill whoever, just to spread a message, whatever reason he's doing it, anti-government, whatever. So how do you figure out that's going to happen before it happens? Like, how are there all these cases of this guy was arrested by the FBI who was planning, not actually doing it, but was planning? How do you figure out if somebody was planning an act of terrorism like that?
That's the hard part, right, George? So forget the New York City field office. Just use all 56 field offices throughout the United States. There are men and women out there doing this 24 hours a day to prevent. No one hears about the ones we prevented, except unless it becomes a high-profile case. You don't hear about the hundreds, if not thousands a year that are prevented. You only hear about the one, again, the analogy is the puck that gets past the goalie, and then it's our fault. Sometimes it was, right. We missed something, an agent or an analyst missed a vital piece of intel. But what you do is it's first of all, we rely on the general public. We rely on the general public to not spy, but to come to law enforcement, whether it's their local law enforcement agency or the federal agency, and say that there's something or something that they saw. It's that mantra. It's that marketing campaign. If you see something, say something. So if you see something or someone suspicious, you should report it. Sometimes that involves an immediate response, and sometimes it just launches a cursory presumptive investigation to see if this individual is up to something nefarious, whether it's just criminal or in furtherance of an act of terrorism, a political or sociological gain. So you rely on the general public, and then you rely on your analytical team who takes the information, analyzes it, derives it, and presents the law. If they assess the risk, is this person or this act a high risk, low risk, medium risk? And then the investigation ensues, and we have a lot of tools at our disposal to do that. We have surveillance, physical surveillance, actually old school, sitting in a car. We have electronic surveillance. We have, the old-fashioned wiretap, if you will. So telephonic surveillance. And each one of those investigative techniques has a threshold. You have to meet as an investigator by the Constitution certain thresholds in order to effort that or implement that into your investigation. Otherwise, you're violating that individual's Fourth Amendment right or some amendment to the Constitution. So you have to be very cognizant of that. And we also rely on our United States Attorney's Office or our district attorneys who are going to be the ones to prosecute it. So we have to have buy-in from the respective attorney to go ahead and say, yeah, this is something we want to pursue, and then write us the logical paperwork, the legal paperwork for subpoenas to gain telephone records, to look up eBay purchases, or Craigslist purchases, or Amazon purchases, or Home Depot purchases, wherever they're buying their supplies. So those, there's a lot of pieces to it that try to validate, look into these individuals or these suspicious acts to validate whether or not they're legitimate or it is just a rudimentary call for service. And we always tell the public, always call, because let us figure out if it's a real thing or not, but never be afraid to call your law enforcement agency to go, hey, I think I just saw something that should be reported and investigated.
So let's say, for example, there's a man who has made comments, for example, right? Let's just say he's making a lot of comments saying to someone he knows, right? Something about the president, like, oh, if only someone were to do X to the president, or, if only they were to, like, very, very obvious things, but very below, like, let's just say he says, like, oh man, somebody should blow that place up, right? And, people say it's a joke, or they don't know how to perceive it. At what point should a person say something, right? At what point does it become like this is a concerning thing as compared to just this person might have a strange sense of humor?
Everyone's said something off the cuff about, man, I would really like to do something, right? No one ever does it. I mean, I've done it, like sitting in traffic or whatever the algorithm is. It's when it becomes chronic. It's when somebody believes the individual making that statement, not just made the statements. We have freedom of speech. We could say what we want in this country, pretty much, except yell fire in a movie theater. But for the most part, you can say anything you want. That's the beauty of the United States as compared to a lot of other countries. But if that individual has what we call the three M's, the motive, the opportunity, and the means. So the motive is saying it, but saying it with a fervor that would indicate, and saying it over and over again, that would indicate that this person may be doing more than just spousing off because they're mad. It's, April 15th and it's tax day. But do they also have so there's your motive. Do they have the opportunity? Do they have access to a facility that they might want to destroy, the New York City subway system? Do they have access to the chemicals and the materials to build a destructive device according to Title 18, or bomb, right, an IED? And do they have the means, the financial means, the mental means, the capacity to build and actually carry out a plot that would be that could harm anybody, to include the general public or property or whatever? So there's kind of three things that we assess as far as what the risk goes. And whether or not this is a valid threat, it's a logical threat, or it's just somebody just really having a really bad day, which happens all the time.
Well, when that person gets reported, right? Like they are making all these comments, some may even be saying something online, right? Let's just say they're making all these comments about whoever, and they might even be making plans to do so, right? So, where do you go to figure out who that person is? Where do you go in the investigation if, let's just say, it's somebody on the internet who is making who's making that statement anonymously?
You go to you're kind of delving into a cyber crime issue of it, but subpoenas, legal subpoenas, will generally be issued for whoever the provider is. Pick a social media platform. They'll try to give us by a court of law as much pedigree information as they can on who the person is. We all know a lot of people put false names on emails and false names on certain handles that they use in the social media world. I'm not a social media expert. I'm not on it at all for these reasons, but so those are logical investigations to get into the background. And we have the FBI has hired a lot of folks that are experts in this, that know how to navigate the different aspects, work with certain companies to legally, I want to emphasize, legally obtain paper in order to get a warrant or subpoena for somebody's records. And then those records are assessed. They're assessed and it's further validated. It's not somebody makes a threatening statement today, we go knock on their door, and it's, unless that statement had such fervor, like in this day and age, I'm going to a school and I'm going to go shoot it up tomorrow. That, I would say, in this day and age, unfortunately, haven't been responding to active shooters in environments, and have best friends that have been part of those. Those do not get taken lightly, and there's not a lot of time to conduct a long-term investigation when that is very specific to a specific location, to a specific threat or school or whatever. Those are acted on. They have to be in this day and age almost immediately.
So let's say, for example, there's a person, right, in person. We're not talking online anymore. Let's just say they're someone and they say just all the time they're talking about how terrible the government is. Let's just, as an example, right? And then eventually, you start to realize you're like, there's something wrong here, and you start noticing things like that, and they're making these comments over and over and over again, and then they decide, I'm either going to submit a tip online or I'm going to call the New York field office, for example. Where do you go from there?
It's, again, you have to put some validity into who is reporting it. What is this person's access? Is the person that's reporting it, are they a known confidential informant? So now we're dealing with the human aspect, human on human. So is this person a vetted informant that the FBI or law enforcement have worked with in the past, that this individual's information has been vetted and is generally on point X% of the time? Then it holds a little bit more water. That's more valid of a threat, and we put a lot more investigative resources into looking into it. Otherwise, if it's just somebody that was at a meeting and, hey, Mike has been really spousing off, the FBI will probably just do it starts with basic background checks. We run names. That's all legal to do. And then we just try to see if there's a pattern, or if this person was already a convicted criminal or has some a history of violent action. Not just speaking off the top of their head, because everyone, again, can say what they want, but is there a history there? And that's what all those databases do help us, and help. I say us, it's not me anymore, but investigators and analysts look into to really judge the validity of a threat and what resources should be put into doing it. There used to be an old saying: you can't say bomb, or you can't type bomb on the internet because the FBI is watching. Trust me, the FBI does not have the resources to watch everybody on the internet. No, it's just not there. And no one's just waiting for you to type in BOMB, and then all of a sudden 15 minutes later you're going to get a knock on your door. That's Hollywood. That's TV. That doesn't exist. That's urban legend.
So, if, for example, someone reports something, because there's even TV shows that you could probably think of, true crime type of things, right? Like things that have actually happened, where people start emailing each other back and forth about how do we obtain X, Y, and Z, right, for the party, right? Like let's just say they're using code words. How do you determine the difference between a code word, for example, in an investigation, as opposed to, the actual what they're actually meaning?
Yeah, it's in the context. I'll give you an exact example of this. We worked a case in 2009. It was the attempted bombing of the New York City subway system. Um, Najib Zazi was the bomber. He started out in Colorado, and he had a dialogue with an individual that we knew about here. And the long story short, through a legal search warrant, we were able to get the individual's computer, and we were able to see the dialogue back and forth through the search warrant. And they used the term, they were going to make a cake, and they needed the oil for the cake. Oil was the code. By just you look at the totality of the message, and you're like, they're not making cake. This is, we could kind of, based on bombing experts, we can go, hey, the oil is not oil for a cake. Cake is a bomb, and the oil is an ingredient that they needed in order to make an explosive or energetic material. So that's just based on experience and training, and using a pool of really smart people. It's not just always one individual, it's a team. These are task forces for a reason, because you're able to draw in from subject matter expertise all over your geographical area that you work and respond to. And we look for code words like that because they don't really fit into the algorithm.
Okay, it's funny that you're actually mentioning this, because I didn't know you were involved in this case. And actually, that's the exact case I was thinking of. There is a TV show, I think it's called Terrorism Close Calls, that years and years ago came out, and they actually spoke about the exact case that you worked on,
Yeah.
which I didn't know you worked on it, but that's pretty cool though. Small world, I guess. But so when you worked on that case, now let me ask you this. When you worked on that case, how did you originally find out that this individual was going to do this enough to where you decided to go out and then search his computer?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said before. I used to give case studies on this straight investigation. Me and my partners. It was an astute checkout clerk from a commercial beauty supply store. Realized that Zazi went in one day to buy a shopping cart full of hair dye. It's peroxide. It's called Clairol. It's a liquid peroxide that you use to dye hair. Well, that's a significant precursor for an improvised explosive material called TATP or HMTD. They're the terrorist choice of explosives in this day and age, other than ammonium nitrate. Well, I'll be generic, but basically what happened was, checkout clerk tells the supervisors that this individual is buying an unusual amount of this Clairoxide, this peroxide liquid hair dye. And by the way, they did the right thing by asking, do you own a beauty supply store? And the answer is no. I just have a lot of girlfriends. Kind of joke, paid, and walked out. She lets her manager know. Manager calls local police. Local police go, this is not right. They have the surveillance tape. They contact the local FBI office. There's a joint terrorism task force out in Denver. And then we realized we have the name is run. They kind of were able to trace it back to Zazi by CCTV and by some other, by CCTV basically. And we realized we have an active, ongoing case on this individual. There's what we call a preliminary investigation. He was reported somewhere else. He came on our radar for whatever reason, and now this is enough we have a potential conspiracy or an overt act in order to commit a bombing. And that's what happened. So he was basically followed from Aurora, Colorado. It's a suburb of Denver, all the way across the United States via physical surveillance. So basically people in cars, kind of all the way across until he got to the George Washington Bridge. His car was searched through a routine traffic stop. Unfortunately, the officer missed the energetic material and very sensitive energetic material, is dangerous as heck, that he drove all the way across the United States. He was lost for about a day and a half, until his car was found by was outside by, we call them LPRs, license plate readers. His vehicle, we had a lookout as a rental car. We found his car and we were able to tow it where we could actually search it based on a valid warrant. And that blew everything out. That just the balloon went from really small to all of a sudden the balloon was raised, and we have everybody in the New York City area, as well as probably most of the FBI working on this case. That's one of the ones that, just based on really good, I think this person's up to something no good, letting law enforcement know. And then fortunately he didn't complete the overt act. We were able to get him before he and his partners try to blow up or employ a device on a New York City subway system where a lot of people would have been injured.
Well, one thing I will ask about is the FBI's terrorist watch list, right?
Yeah.
Now, watch lists are kind of a complicated issue in some ways because the name, I guess, is a little bit misleading because it means that you're actively watching these individuals, right?
Yeah.
Now, in some cases, it could just be a catalog, from my understanding, of certain individuals that are of interest. But what does it take to determine if somebody is put on a watch list? What effort does that take? And what goes into that? Because, and I will follow this up too with allegedly a few years ago, I believe there's actually a leak of over 2.1 million names, which allegedly were part of this watch list. I don't know how true this was. I don't know if it's 2 million people in reality, but how do you determine who's put on a watch list and what goes into that?
Now you got to remember, I've been out for 4 years and the rules have changed, but you just don't get put on the watch list. I just can't, because I don't like my neighbor, call the FBI and say, you need to put this guy on the watch list. Again, the investigators and analysts have to meet certain benchmarks for an individual to get put on that watch list. Now, some people have very common names, like your name is not very common. My name is not very common, but Joe Smith has a very common name. So there might be 100 Joe Smiths on the watch list, at least listed, but it's really only one person, and it's vetted through additional pedigree information, which is a date of birth, of Social Security, some type of a numerical identifier or physical characteristic or trait. So it takes a lot to get put on the watch list. And the watch list, like you said, it doesn't mean that we're watching the individual. It means somebody's name came up in an active terrorism investigation. And in order to track that individual, because the FBI or law enforcement do not have the resources to track all these people 24/7. If I'm on the watch list and I am now driving from New York to Chicago and I get pulled over, well, if my name is a proper hit on the watch list with proper pedigree information, that state trooper or that patrolman, that county sheriff can go, wait a minute, this guy's on the watch list. And there's usually descriptions: detain and call, or let go. It's just a way to be able to track individuals that are perceived to be doing something nefarious, very nefarious, and keep passive monitoring. It's passive monitoring on these folks, and keep them off airplanes. It really starts with the no-fly list, right? So it's to keep people from getting on airplanes and performing a nefarious act. And how many times have we seen that? I mean, the transportation industry is extremely vulnerable. It is still and always will be the number one target of terrorists and bad guys and gals throughout the world, because they get more bang, excuse the pun, but they get more bang from their buck, and they get immediate attention and satisfaction out of it. So that's kind of the watch list or the no-fly list. By no means is the government, I want to make this clear, the government is, we don't have the time, they don't have the time or resources to be watching normal Americans who are doing nothing but espousing their political beliefs. The watch list and all these lists are created in order to look for the real criminals and the real bad guys and keep tabs on them and eventually bring them to justice.
So when it comes to the terrorist watch list, right? You said that you can't, it's not like you can just call somebody and then they're immediately reported and then therefore they're put into a watch list, right? How do you determine though what's an important report though? Like, because what you're saying
Corroborated
is
information. Everything's corroborated. Everything's corroborated through a database, through an interview, an in-person interview, through subpoenas, telephone records, spider web of things. My name's on the list because somebody said I did something, or I'm saying something that I'm going to do something bad, nefarious, and hurt or damage somebody or something. Well, they'll look at my phone records via a valid legal subpoena, and they'll see who I've been in contact with. Have I been in contact with other known individuals who are also espousing violence, overt acts of violence, not just going, I just really hate this place and I'm really pissed and I'm going to blow something up. Overt acts of violence and conspiracy to commit violence. Then you tie those seeds together. So now you have an enterprise, and you see if that enterprise is a known or identified terrorist group that's established by the government, by Homeland Security or whoever's doing it in this day and age. And that's how you continue to run with it. Everything gets vetted, everything gets validated through multiple databases, through multiple interviews. It's not just a one-off. Everything tends to be coordinated. At least it should be anyway.
So now I want to talk a little bit about the cases that you worked specifically. So you worked on, again, mainly terrorist cases. One of the questions that I have is, are there any cases that you have any regrets about?
No, you mean as far as what we did or didn't do?
Yes.
Yeah, no, you learn from, if you're doing your job, you learn and you keep learning, and you hone your skills. You never become complacent. We got this. We've done this before. I don't have any regrets. I don't think any of my team or the folks I work with have regrets. Your regret is that we never wish it got to a state where somebody tried to actually put a bomb in the middle of something. Now, the bomb worked or didn't work. That's kind of the regret. How do we make that better? How do we prevent the puck going through the goalie again, right? If you use that analogy. No, but the mistakes that I made, that our team made, you learn from them. And fortunately, the mistakes weren't constitutionally violations of the Constitution. I can tell you we never did that, but some of the mistakes were operational on how we responded, or maybe we got tunnel vision, or maybe we were complacent on a scene. You learn from that. So those are the regrets we have. But what you do is you don't repeat them the next time. The hardest thing you could do is when you respond to an explosive crime scene, whether the device went off or the device is still sitting there waiting to go off, is try to do your best. It's easier said than done, trust me, because I've been guilty of it. And you have to learn skills to avoid it. Is avoid tunnel vision, avoid complacency. We've been here before. This is nothing. It's the worst thing anyone could ever say when I would show up to a crime scene. This is nothing. Don't worry about it. But things that are nothing are usually something, and somebody gets hurt, because when it's nothing, you become complacent. But I was able to learn from those mistakes at a young age as an agent, and really a bomb technician, special agent bomb technician, to impart that upon my team, my peers, and do my best not to repeat them. In between all the successes, everyone's got their resume and it's just full of great things everyone's ever done, right? But if you read between the lines of all those successes, are a bunch of failures. And the good ones learn from their mistakes to create more successes, and to not have a piece of paper that identifies it as a bunch of failures. If that makes sense.
Well, now a follow-up question to that is, are there any cases that stick with you even to this day, maybe that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, one of the hardest cases I ever worked was the last one I did. I was sent overseas with the team. It was the 2019, I think. It was one of my last, before I retired as a supervisor. It was one of the last deployments I did. So in Nairobi, Kenya, it was a Dusit hotel attack. A series of individuals that were associated with the terrorist group Al-Shabaab, which operates in East Africa, went to a hotel that they thought was frequented by Westerners. They blew up a suicide device in a courtyard by a cafe, and they went in, and it was an active shooter. They just shot as many people as they could. They actually shot more Africans and Somalis and Kenyans than they did Westerners, which was the irony of it. That just sticks in my mind. It was a tough one. It was a very violent crime scene, and that just resonates with me. And of course, it was my last one. But so it kind of always stays with you, right? You kind of forget all the ones that you started with and the ones in between, but you kind of always remember the last one. And that was my last one. It wasn't like we did anything wrong. We did everything right. We tried to help the Kenyan people try to solve this crime, and multiple people were dead. And it was a very violent, it was a very hard crime scene to deal with. And you just kind of remember it because it was your last one before you kind of went off into retirement. Or for me, it went off to become a supervisor for about a year and then retired. So that sticks with me. There's always the good ones, the success stories, but you always remember the last one you ever went to.
So one actual and it's interesting you mentioned the irony in a case. So there was another case years ago that I remember talking to my public speaking teacher about this in like 2020, like years ago, right? It was a common phenomenon, and there was one in particular case I remember they mentioned where there was a man who went to the house of a federal judge, right? And I believe he killed his the federal judge's son and husband, right? So this is maybe a little bit out of your realm of expertise, but he killed both these people. Ironically, he was a misogynist extremist, right? Like he hated women, and his plan was to kill the judge because she was a woman.
It
Yet
was
he
a
ended
Vance case.
what?
It was Judge Vance. It's called the Vance bomb or the Vance case. If we're talking about the same one.
I think so. I because what he did was he looked it up on he looked it up on the internet. He like what her address.
Mm-hmm. It was a pipe bomb. So the individual, if this is the same case, he put a pipe bomb in the mail. It's a mail bomb. And instead of targeting the judge, he targeted the judge's family.
I don't think we're talking about the same case, but do talk about that though. That's interesting.
Right. It's the same thing. So it's just an individual is targeting a judge, it's Judge Vance, and sent a package bomb to the individual's residence, and the judge did not open it up. I think the spouse did, and the device was meant to function when the box was open. It pulled the string, which basically set the device off and killed the individuals that unfortunately the victim that opened the device, an unintended target. But go ahead with your question, and I apologize. It's a different matter.
No, it's all right. I mean, I was gonna say that when it comes to politically targeted cases, like government officials that get targeted in
Mm-hmm.
terrorist cases, because I'm sure that happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that a lot of them don't get reported due to copycat syndrome, I would assume, right?
In a way, I mean, you think about one of the larger ones. This was, I think, 2018. Started out in New York, and then it kind of went. There's 30 something of them all together. I can't even remember the number. It was bomber's name was Caesar Sayoc. He was based out of Miami, Florida. He sent a series of package bombs to high-ranking Democratic profile individuals. George Soros, who's a known, heavy donator to the Democratic cause. Hillary Clinton. CNN, as well as a lot of others. So that was politically motivated. He was trying to influence something and get a message out. And his political theories were being furthered to target prominent political officials, or just prominent officials, not necessarily politically, but fundraisers and sponsors and voices of spokespeople for a specific cause, in this case the Democrats, in order to try to influence their opinions on things and what they were up to. But again, politically, specifically, it was a United States person. It wasn't really he wasn't affiliated with any terrorist group. It was just a one individual who was politically motivated and was adamant that his political leanings were better than the other sides, and decided to target them through a series of bombs through the mail.
One question now I want to ask about surveillance is that when you have physical, like on the ground surveillance with a van, for example,
Yeah.
the stereotypical FBI van, right? Or
Yeah.
car or whatever, right? How do you go about doing that without making it obvious? Because if, let's just say you get a car that's, following you for miles and miles, you're going to start to look at the back and be like, something's up here, something's wrong. So,
Yeah.
how do you mitigate or avoid that entirely?
Skill. So I will tell you this: when you go over, when you turn on your Wi-Fi, when you're over your friend's house or neighbor's house, and you see the Wi-Fi handle FBI surveillance van, trust me, it's not an FBI surveillance van. It's somebody that's just turned their Wi-Fi router and says they named it FBI surveillance instead of 123 Mockingbird Lane. We don't do that. And if we are doing it, that's really dumb. But we don't. So, but how do you do it? It's the people that work surveillance are, in most offices, it's a special squad. It's a group of specialized individuals, or 90% of them are agents. There are some, we call them support employees, that do it as well. And they train on it and they practice it, and they use vehicles that are generally when you do any type of surveillance, physical surveillance, what you do is, and it doesn't matter where you are, you try to blend in to the environment. So, maybe if we're in a rich part of town, we're using high-end vehicles. Maybe if we're in a more commercial part of town, we're using an industrial part of town, we're using industrial type vehicles. You just find vehicles that blend into the environment in order not to stick out. And it's training. Everything we do is based on training and experience. So the people that are doing surveillance are experts on it. They've been doing it for years. They train on it. They work their skill literally probably about 18 hours a day. We get burnt. Surveillance gets burnt all the time. It's the nature of the business. Somebody sooner or later is going to figure out the car behind me has been behind me for a little bit. Sometimes it does happen. I've been burnt on surveillance. I've been on surveillance and I blew it. And they made me, and then you just do what you got to do. You either peel off or you just stay on them because they already know you're there anyway. But just training, sometimes it's a lot of luck that they don't make you, or you lose them and then you find them coming around the other turn or something like that, or around a corner. But it's the men and women that do surveillance are very well trained. They're professionals, and they were an asset to any cases that I either worked directly or I supported.
Well, when you did get burnt, what happened? How did you know? What did you do?
You know when all of a sudden the person in front of you is riding their brakes really hard. So you basically had one or two options: you either pulled off, or you call it bumper lock, and you just stay on the individual. And if he or she goes home, you peel off sooner or later. If anything, you thwarted or you derailed what your subject was attempting to do, or somebody who they were attempting to meet. You put that on hold into another day. Look, criminals by nature, they're criminals, right? Doesn't matter what they're doing. Bank robberies, kidnappings, bombings, white collar crime, defrauding, pensioners and taxpayers. They're criminals. They're always going to be suspicious of law enforcement. So they think everyone around them is a cop, an agent. Every car around them is surveillance. Every building they go to is tapped or videoed, that their phones are tapped. So if you're a professional criminal, you're already suspicious, because that's the other part of your job is you're supposed to be suspicious because you're doing something that's illegal.
Well, how would you become aware that the person became aware? And I'm not even just saying like visibly, right?
They change their pattern. So when you do surveillance, when you do an investigation, you establish a pattern of life. So when the individual breaks off of that pattern, then maybe that they are changing their ways a little bit. If you watch the movies, if you watch the Navy movies, you used to call them Crazy Ivans. How do you know a submarine, how does a submarine lose surveillance, right? The Tom Clancy books or whatever people read or watch, and they do surveillance detection route. So they change their pattern, they change their route in order to throw surveillance off or to make it. So that's tradecraft. All those movies about spies and all those books, there's legitimate books around spies, tradecraft. So you do surveillance detection. So you know what to look for as a bad guy, no matter what you're up to, espionage or crime. So you train yourself to look to look. And when all of a sudden this individual looks like they're doing an SDR, surveillance detection route, or a surveillance detection maneuver, you're like, we probably got burnt, and there's not a lot you can do about it.
Now this is switching away a little bit, and this is switching into just general about your career, generally speaking. Did you ever get to meet any of the directors?
Yeah. It's something, let's put it this way. When you become a brand new agent, you meet the director on the stage, you shake his, or in this case, my case, his hand, you get your credentials, you get your badge, you get your picture taken, and you walk off. And that, you hope, is the last time you ever meet the director of the FBI for any reason, good or bad, because you want to fly underneath the radar. You don't want to bring a name to yourself, even if it's a good name. It's not why we joined the FBI, is to get to become heroes or whatever. Notarization. That's not why we join. But if you find yourself involved in high profile cases, or you have a special skill, you tend to find yourself unwantingly, at least I did, in those positions. So I met Director Free because I was a new agent under Director Free. I met Director Mueller because I was involved in a couple things that warranted his presence. They were good things, but I didn't ever want to meet him again. Who's after Mueller's? Comey. Did I ever meet Comey? I never met Comey, but I know agents that did, that would call him. And then I retired as Director Ray was leaving. Probably my most dealings were with Mueller. I've either met him in person or I had to speak to him on the phone. Not that he's calling me directly, but my boss would like, you got to talk to this guy because it was an explosive case. It's probably, I think, the attempted bombing in Times Square. And next thing I know, I'm sitting there and I'm on speakerphone with the director and all his minions and staff trying to explain, in my best opinion, what just happened or didn't happen. So it's nothing it's nothing you seek out is to meet the director of any organization or the chief of any organization. Sometimes it just happens.
Well, this is interesting though that you're saying you didn't want to meet him, right?
No.
It was not personal though.
No, it had nothing. It's not personal. It's just professional. I want to do my job. I don't want to meet the director of the FBI because I'm doing something wrong. And the whole idea was you do your job, you become a quiet professional. You do your job, you're professional, you're quiet about it. So unfortunately, sometimes you ended up having to talk to the director or the assistant director. It's nothing personal. It's just the way agents in my generation were brought up. You stay underneath the radar as long as you can. So you don't have to ever stand in front of the director one way or the other. It has nothing to do with it's personal. It's the old philosophy of being an agent.
Is that in the sense of you don't want to get in trouble, or like, is it kind of like meeting the principal in a way?
Well, if you did something wrong, then yeah, it's like meeting the principal. But if you're doing something, again, everyone wants to do the right job. Everyone wants to catch the top 10 fugitive, but you do it because you want to catch the top 10 fugitive, not because you want to meet the director of the FBI, if that makes sense. We don't do it for the recognition and a badge or a certificate on the wall. You do it because you're dedicated, and this is why you took this job. It doesn't matter whatever law enforcement level you are, a local patrol cop or a local sheriff's deputy. Your goal is not to meet the chief of police or the sheriff. Your goal is to stop crime from happening. That's why you took the job. So again, you didn't want the notoriety, right? You try to avoid it, but sometimes it just kind of happened. But as a good agent, you didn't seek it out, if that makes sense. You just want to do your job.
When it came to the directors, though, what types of things do they exactly lead in the FBI? Because I understand that the FBI has a very, 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 very big organizational hierarchy. It's a million different supervisors. And then on top of all those supervisors, there's another one. And then above that, there's associate directors, special agents in charge, regional, residential agent. Like it's so much. So what exactly would the director get involved with?
High profile cases, right? They have to brief the president. They have to brief a threat situation brief every morning at the White House. And I didn't work in headquarters, so I really can't answer to all of this, but they have to brief the president every morning and an intel brief with all the other parts of people assigned to the intel community. So if you had a big case working, it got put into the director's book every day. And the director would pick and choose the ones in the small amount of time that they had in the morning to kind of give an executive brief and brief those. So you had to be prepared if you were one of the agents or analysts or whoever, supervisors or big bosses were assigned or working one of those high profile cases, that you knew what color the subject's car was, because it might get briefed, it might get asked.
So it's just a lot in general.
It's a lot. Yeah. I was more worried about doing my job than worrying about a director's brief, to be honest with you. When I used to have supervisors from headquarters call and go, we need this for director's brief. Many of the agents I knew, to include myself, were like, call my supervisor, I don't have time for this. Because we're trying to work a case. I don't have time, right? We're trying to do something important. Let the bosses talk to the bosses. But the person I answered to, which is either supervisor, assistant special agent in charge, special agent in charge, or in New York, the assistant director in charge, those are the people that would call me when they really needed something, or call my partners or peers and go, I really need this information. And you would stop and do what you needed to because it was important. because they're the ones that you answer to directly. Yeah, the FBI is a large entity, right? But it's a bunch of satellites that do report to the director overall. But everyone in that field office, whether it's New York City or Omaha, Nebraska, they answer to the boss of that office. And you have to make sure you're answering the mail to your boss of the office, like you're, no matter what job you have.
So now you've also had jobs in the Department of Justice, and you were the director and chief of staff of a $20 million U.S. government sponsored program in Somalia. So
Yeah.
what, and I'm just literally reading this right off your page. You led and guided a team of 28 advisors and staff, providing advisement, training, and subject matter expertise to the Somalia Federal Police Force, specializing in counterterrorism operations. So what exactly was what was this, right? Like, why did you need to go there? What did that look like? How did you help? And what was the ultimatum?
Well, I got hired after I retired, so I wasn't associated with the government anymore. I was retired, but I was hired as a contractor. So the program is funded by the Department of State, and it's all over the world. It's facilitated. This program was facilitated by the Department of Justice, and it was implemented through a major third-party contractor, and they sub that out to some people like me. So I got hired I was the assistant director, I was the director, I was chief of staff. I did all three kind of jobs, if you will, in the course of my almost 2 years there. So it has what the page says. There was a team of 28 advisors and mentors, and the difference between us and everybody else is we actually worked and lived amongst the Somali police, the group we were advising. And we were advisors and mentors in the truest sense of the word. Open up Webster's dictionary and find a definition for advisor and mentor, and that's what we did. We weren't operational. We didn't make arrests with them. We didn't write their paperwork. We didn't pick up their evidence. We didn't disarm their bombs. It was a team of advisors that were responsible for teaching our Somali partners, and we have a partnership with Somalia, what we call global best practices on this is how we did it. Now, how the FBI did it, how that advisor did it through his or her 20 or 30 or 40 years of law enforcement experience. We had advisors from all over the world, all walks of life, male and female, all different agencies, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, foreign law enforcement, you name it, they did it. And they were hired because they were SMEs. They were subject matter experts in what they did. It was their job to teach the Somalis how to improve upon their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, build standing operating procedures and global best practices, and made them sustainable, which means that when the U.S. leaves and the money runs out, which is basically happening, at least in that program now as we speak, that they can do it on their own without any aid or additional advisement. It was a pretty neat program to be a part of.
Well, one thing I actually want to ask you about your career as a whole, everything that you've ever done, is a lot of it is very stressful, as I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with not only people's lives, but your career could be, changed in an instant, depending on if you make a very big mistake, no matter what the mistake is, you are basically on the hook for every single thing that you do. So how did you cope with, I guess, a lot of the stress that you had to manage with?
Friends and family. You rely on an outlet in order to talk about things. Some people, honestly, some people go see, therapy. It's not a widely discussed thing. Some people need a professional therapist because to deal with what he or she has seen. And that's not tough. That's not machismo. Well, in this day and age, when there's an unfortunate epidemic of law enforcement officers killing themselves, taking their own lives because of their careers, it's encouraged, and it needs to be encouraged. But I found solace, and I found decompression through my comrades, the people I work with that experience some of the same things, my family, through nature, going on a hike, kind of breathing the air, through some spiritual. A lot of people find it through spiritual therapy, and that's fine. Whatever floats your boat. Everyone has their own way to decompress and to deconflict what goes on in their head. I just found it by working with my team, my friends and family, and laughing. No matter what horrific situation you're in, you always try to figure out a way to laugh, not about it, but within the confines of it at some time. And some people don't get that. But you have to smile, you have to laugh, you have to breathe, you have to decompress, and you have to learn how to have your team just little ways to get them to decompress. And sometimes they're little sayings, sometimes it's a touch, sometimes it's a fist bump or a high five, it's a hug, sometimes it's a beer after work. All different ways that everyone uses. I just learned how to laugh and try to leave my work at work and not bring it home to the house. That's, some people can do it, some people can't. Sometimes I was good at it, sometimes I wasn't good at it at all.
Well, now going back to the contract, right? I was just
Sure.
curious. But how do you deal with working with and helping a government such as Somalia, which is known to be an unstable government, right? As are many governments in the area, right? Their governments are in cases corrupt, just generally unstable, not, necessarily working for the citizens,
Mhm.
it's a very survival based mindset. So how do you work with a group of people like that?
Adaptability, understand what they're up against, understand them personally and professionally. That's what this team did, why they were successful in many ways, is they got to know, let's use them at, we'll call them Somalis, we'll call them the benefactors. They got to know their benefactor. They got to know their husbands and wives. They got to know how many children they had. They embedded themselves with them. They ate lunch with them. They ate dinner with them. Sometimes we didn't drink because they're traditionally Muslim, right? So, but you adapt, you understand their culture, you have to listen, you have to listen, you have to listen, and you have to listen, and then have a better understanding of how you can make change, not for just change sake, but change to make them better, and change that works in the confines of their culture, not because this is how America does it, or this is how whatever country the advisor was from did it. The West will just use that term. It's because this is what works best globally, and we're going to try to, this is not the big hammer of the, good old USA, because it doesn't work there, but we're going to try to teach you how we did it, but adapt it to your culture. And that's hard. That was hard for some advisors to do. Some weren't successful. The majority of them were at it. It's not an easy task to do that, because everyone wants to say, my way was the best way. No, your way wasn't the best way. They might have a way to be better. And then you also try to learn from your benefactor as well. You have to understand what they're up against personally, professionally, financially, monetarily, government-wise, politically, and that their life is in danger every time they go to work and they go home, as well as their families' lives. And you have to be able to have compassion and understanding for the people you're trying to advise. Some people couldn't do that. Some could, and that's why some of those advisors were really successful doing it.
Last couple questions I want to ask. So CNN, you worked for CNN for a little bit, and a contract, not officially, but you did work for them for a little bit, or with them, I should say. What was that like, and how did that come about?
Yeah, it was a recommendation off a couple of friends. They were looking, it was would be the 2020 election, I guess, right? So they were looking to bring in some more law enforcement subject matter experts, or talking heads, as we like to call us. And they brought me in to be more specifically to deal with potential bombings that could affect the election, because everyone thought the idea was the election could have been violent from either side, right? Left or right extremists. It obviously wasn't. Thankfully, it shows the resiliency of the American people to actually conduct a peaceful election for the most part. But that's why they brought me in. And then I think the first one I ever did, we call it a hit. So the first hit I ever did was on the Christmas Day Nashville bombing. So I got thrown right into it, I think about 7 o'clock in the morning. I was nervous as heck. It was not easy. And I had some really good producers and handlers that would give me good advice, and I got better. At least I think I did over the course of the 2 years I did it. And then they brought me in for other law enforcement issues, just general terrorism and security cases that were going on. A lot of, unfortunately, active shooter at schools and active shooter at, public places that they asked for my opinion on. I enjoyed doing it. It was stressful. I mean, I'm literally looking at a camera. Sometimes I was brought on set. Sometimes there was one time I did it on location. It was a attack on the New York City subway system over in Brooklyn, an area where I used to work. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed meeting the other subject matter experts that I was on with, panels, and meeting either virtually or in person some of the anchors or the hosts. I enjoyed it. It was a good part of my life. I'm I don't miss it by any means, but I'm glad I had an opportunity to do it.
Well, now I have 2 questions, and these are going to be the last questions, and we end the recording, and then we're going to talk a little bit after the show.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
So, do you have any advice for young people?
Yeah, be a leader. Be a leader. Be a leader. Have a plan. Have a plan. Enjoy life. These are a lot of one-liners, but it's all important. I was actually talking to my goddaughter over text this morning. She's a senior or about to be a senior in high school, and she's doing great things. Like, don't forget to enjoy life. Don't let life pass you by. Enjoy life. Enjoy your friends. Your professional careers will be upon you before you know it. And you're gonna look back and go, "I wish I." Don't be the person that says, "I wish I would have or could have." Have a plan. You want to be an astronaut, that's great. But when you can't become an astronaut, have an alternate plan. I wanted to be second baseman for the New York Yankees. Well, I realized that dream wasn't going to happen when I was a young kid. So I had to have another plan and another plan after that. So just be flexible. Don't get down. If you do get down, allow yourself a short period of time to get down on yourself and kind of kick the dirt, as we like to say. But pick yourself up and charge ahead. It's easy to get frustrated. But don't get down on yourself. Have a plan and back it up and learn. If you made a mistake, admit it, and learn from that mistake and continue to find your goal and find your happiness, because it's out there.
All right. It was great having you on. The last question I'm going to ask you is, do you have any final words to the audience?
No, thanks for bringing me on. Hopefully it was entertaining, about an hour or so. Hopefully somebody learned something. But yeah, I appreciate you doing this. I've watched some of your other podcasts with some of the other guests you had on, and we appreciate everything you're doing. Law enforcement's getting a bad rap, and I will just tell you this: law enforcement's getting a bad rap. Sometimes it's deserved, but most times it's not. Support your local law enforcement officer. Be kind to the police. Their job is terrible. It's a hard job. They do it for all the right reasons. We all have our bad seeds. Every agency, every organization, every team, every classroom has the 1% that ruins it for the rest. Don't let that 1% ruin it for the rest. And everyone just be good and be kind to each other.
That's an awesome way to end it. All right. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll talk a little bit after the show. All right. It was great
Thanks.
having you on.
Thank you.
And 3, 2, 1.